Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Resistance Live. It's the 25th of November, 2025, as we head into Thanksgiving. I hope you're all doing well. We had an incredible win, at least I would consider it a win, yesterday in the Eastern District of Virginia federal court, which actually happens to be the place where I did my first ever federal court argument as an attorney all the way back in 1997. Particularly, we lost, or the DOJ lost, I should say, on a motion to dismiss the indictments against Jim Comey and Letitia James on the grounds that Lindsay Halligan was improperly appointed as the U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. We have a lot of questions about this coming up this morning on the Patreon feed. So I want to just tackle a couple of questions that came up immediately. The first is that the cases were dismissed without prejudice. That means there is an opportunity for them to be refiled if the appointment of Lindsay Halligan is remedied. So I want everybody to understand something. One of the bases for the dismissal of the cases is that the administration is not allowed to consecutively appoint people to 180-day terms as acting U.S. attorneys in a given district. They can do it once. After that, the person who has to take on that role has to be either confirmed by Congress, by the Senate, or appointed by the district judges for that district. All right. Trump is not allowed to just install somebody else into that position because he hasn't been able to get somebody through the Senate or because he doesn't want the district judges to do it. All right. So while the cases were dismissed without prejudice, which arguably gives them an opportunity to refile, the real problem here is that they've got to get a properly installed U.S. attorney into that position. And that then brings us to the issue of the statute of limitations, around which there were a lot of questions. So many of you may recall that one of the reasons why the rush to indict Jim Comey was done so quickly after Halligan was installed. And actually, probably one of the reasons why it was handled so improperly. We talked about this last week, about the fact that there's been a huge fiasco in this indictment generally. None of the standard procedures before the grand jury were followed. There are indications that the final indictment wasn't even voted on by the entire grand jury. We had a hearing about this last week where the record itself was quite damning on that front to begin with. The reason why there was such a rush was because the statute of limitations to indict Jim Comey was going to expire in September, okay? End of September, September 30th, the statute of limitations for the crimes that were alleged against him was going to run. They indicted him 4 days before that. Okay, now there seems to be a little bit of confusion about this particular part of the U.S. Code that sometimes grants a grace period when an indictment is dismissed. All right, so there's this part of the U.S. Code, the law, just so everybody understands, U.S. Code is like the law, the documented law. Many of you who have been here know that we have a common law, which is essentially passed down through precedent, and then we have code, which is actual laws passed through Congress, okay? So 18 U.S.C. 3288, which is the section of the U.S. Code that addresses this issue, says that if an indictment is dismissed and the window up for the statute of limitations has run during the time that the indictment was pending, the DOJ has an extra 6 months to cure, okay? This is a very specific provision in the U.S. Code. However, there are some people who appear to be misreading a section of the opinion from yesterday that raises specific questions about whether or not that part of the code is going to apply in this case. So you will all remember that back in October, the end of October, I think it was actually on Halloween, the DOJ did this really funky thing with the Comey indictment because they knew they had a problem with the appointment of Lindsay Halligan. Pam Bondi named Lindsay Halligan a special prosecutor, not the U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, but then also added her name as a special prosecutor, which they claimed at the time would have cured the problem with Lindsay Halligan being improperly appointed. The judge rejected that yesterday. And one of the arguments that the DOJ made was, well, we could have gotten another indictment on October 31st because we were still within the 6-month window. But they did not raise that part of the code at the time that they filed on October 31st to name her as a special prosecutor. So there is a real question in the Comey case now about whether or not the statute of limitations has actually run. I would argue, plenty of commentators on MSNBC, now known as MS Now, said this yesterday, that the Comey indictment is done because those 4 days, first of all, because the initial indictment was fraudulent, and second of all, because those particular 4 days ran under this fraudulent indictment that never should have existed, it was long gone by October 31st, and the 6-month window would not apply because the indictment itself was fraudulent from the start, okay? Meaning like it's void ab initio. That's what we say, void from the very beginning, all right? That doesn't mean, and I want to make this really clear, that the Trump regime is not going to try to invoke this part of the code to say that they have 6 months from September 26th to try to refile an indictment against Jim Comey. They may try to do that, okay? The case with Letitia James is slightly different. Again, it's not a case about obstruction of Congress or lying to Congress. It's a case about mortgage fraud. I have told everybody here many, many times that different statutes of limitations apply depending on the provision that is brought, okay? Now, because it was, these cases were dismissed without prejudice, technically, as long as it's within the statute of limitations and they can get a newly appointed U.S. attorney with a new grand jury to actually indict properly using the right forms, to keep the court reporter present in the grand jury room, which didn't happen with Comey, to actually make sure that the grand jury votes on the correct indictment, they may be able to get another indictment now, okay? But again, I think with Comey, there is a very strong argument that the statute of limitations has run. I would be quite surprised, actually, to see them win that one in court. Never say never, but I think that, he's kind of done with this. And I'm not alone in that analysis. I do have to remind everybody that great legal minds can differ, but there seems to be some misreading of the opinion yesterday because the opinion yesterday did not say you have 6 months to cure. What it said was the argument that was raised by the DOJ that the attempt to cure the Comey indictment on October 31st was totally fine because we were within that 6-month window. That is the argument that was rejected, all right, by the court. The court did not rule you have 6 months to cure, okay? So people need to be really careful about the importance of either reading the opinion itself, if you are capable of doing that. Many of you have gotten much more familiar with legalese thanks to our nearly 9 years here of educating all of you, or you need to rely on a lawyer who's actually read the opinion, okay? So what happens next from here? Well, there's a curious issue here, which is that whether or not a right to appeal exists from this particular ruling is a very big question mark. That has something to do with the fact that the case was dismissed because of the unlawful appointment of Halligan, okay? In other words, because the case arguably should never have been brought in the first place, whether or not the appeals court then gets jurisdiction over an appeal, big question mark, all right? And there are indications in the opinion that would seem to lean in the direction that the judge, he doesn't get to decide this, but that the district judge felt, that, or they don't get to decide it. The district judge felt that there might not be a right to appeal. Okay, but in the event that there might be, there is a footnote that contains a reference to something written by Samuel Alito about the fact that the appointments clause for U.S. attorneys would bar a U.S. attorney from serving in an instance like this. And that in and of itself seems to be a flag for if and when this gets to the Supreme Court. Okay, so I just want everybody to be mindful that they are going to try their usual shenanigans. Like, we all know this, right? They're probably going to appeal, even though they may not have a right to appeal. They may try to re-indict Comey, even though there's a very strong argument that the statute of limitations is passed. They are definitely going to try to re-indict Letitia James. It's just a guarantee. So it is a really big win from the standpoint of the judicial branch pushing back against malicious prosecutions. I do want to mention, because somebody asked me this question, why was this dismissal ruled upon because on the grounds of the improper nature of Halligan's appointment versus the malicious prosecution claims? And it's because of this, okay? If the appointment of Halligan makes every indictment that has happened since her appointment void, there's no basis for the district court to rule on anything else having to do with the case. Okay, the court cannot selectively pick and choose whether it's going to rule on malicious prosecution if literally there shouldn't be jurisdiction in the first place because she was improperly appointed. So all of this, from the standpoint of where we sit, was actually very strategically done by the judge that ruled on this, because essentially what it said was this case was null from the start. These cases were null from the start. And that, again, puts it in a much more harder position on appeal than the more fact-based arguments around whether or not it's a malicious prosecution or a vindictive prosecution. Okay, so I hope everybody kind of understands that. But it's a very good moment for us. And I will just say that, they keep losing all of these. Again, they've lost 1,000 lawyers inside the DOJ since this administration began. Part of that is because they are demanding that lawyers inside the DOJ and lawyers outside the DOJ, because Halligan was a White House aide before she became U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. They're demanding that they do things that could cost them their bar licenses. And I will just tell you that based on what we've seen from Lindsay Halligan so far, just in terms of the grand jury proceedings, I think that if somebody brings a bar complaint against her who has knowledge, it can't be a random member of the general public. I'm just going to say that. Don't waste your time doing it. You can do it, but it's not going to go anywhere. All right. If someone brings a cause of action against her, a complaint against her, which Jim Comey could do in a jurisdiction where she's licensed, I think there's going to be an extremely serious ethical challenge with regard to whether or not she should get to keep her bar license. Because there's basically no question, if you know anything about the facts related to the grand jury proceedings here, that her conduct was wildly unethical. And that in and of itself is going to raise additional consequences down the road. Now, I've been asked about disbarment proceedings a lot on Blue Sky in the last couple of days. So I do just want to explain to everybody a couple of things about how they work. They vary from state to state. So keep this in mind. Lawyers are licensed by particular states. And then once you are licensed in a particular state, you can be sworn in as the member of the bar in certain federal courts. Okay, so I passed the bar in Virginia. It was the first place I passed it. Very hard year. Lots of stories about that and where it was taken and doing it live inside the Roanoke Conference Center. But that's another story for another day. And as soon as I was sworn in Virginia, I then filed a motion to be admitted in the Eastern District of Virginia. And actually, my first oral argument in federal court was after I'd passed the bar, but it hadn't been sworn in yet because my boss petitioned the court in that instance to allow me to do the oral argument. But once you pass the bar in a state, then you can be licensed in federal jurisdictions. And then you have the option of taking bar exams in other states if you want to be licensed in those jurisdictions, or doing what's called waiving in which case you also have to go through a moral and character fitness evaluation, which you have to do for every bar, by the way, to get admitted. So I first passed the bar in Virginia. I waived into DC. When I moved to New York City a couple of years later, I waived into the New York bar. Very rigorous character evaluation. Have you ever been arrested? Tell us anything, any kind of litigation you've ever been involved in. They want to talk to like your friends and neighbors. It's crazy. Okay, you get fingerprinted. It's like no joke. All right. And then later on, I also waived into Pennsylvania because I was practicing a lot there. Anyway, point being, the state bar associations are responsible for your professional licenses. And the way that the ethics boards of those bar associations, or in some instances, it's actually under the court system, depending on the state. Okay, like in New York, your license is controlled by the court system of New York State. Somebody can file a complaint saying like, this particular attorney engaged in unethical behavior in this case. They stole my money. That's going to get you disbarred instantly. That's what happened to Michael Avenatti. That you can say they mismanaged the case to a point where their ethics should be brought into question and they should be sanctioned or disbarred. Okay. Or like, they didn't represent me to the full capacity that I deserved, right? There's lots of reasons for this. Now, the thing that will kind of get you always disbarred pretty much is messing around with client funds. Okay. So there are very specific rules about how to do this. But if you, for instance, are an interim U.S. attorney and you procure an indictment against somebody without getting a full vote of a grand jury, that's an ethical violation that could impact someone's life forever, right? And there's a serious argument to be made that that is an ethical breach to such a degree that whatever state she's licensed in would, at bare minimum, start an investigation, hold hearings, and maybe disbar her, sanction her, remove her license for a certain number of years. Okay. And all of that, by the way, gets published then in local publications so that people know about it. All right. I want to make something clear, though, because somebody on Blue Sky, actually a couple people on Blue Sky in the last couple of days were like, why aren't the ethics boards doing their job? Okay. Ethics boards do not have the ability to start ethics investigations sui generis, generally speaking. In some states it may be different, but the ones that I'm familiar with, there has to be a complaint filed, okay? Meaning that what triggers the investigation is a person of knowledge, a lawyer's client, right? In this case, it could be Jim Comey or Letitia James, files a complaint with that bar association alleging unethical conduct. And that triggers an investigation by investigators for the bar that then results in hearings before the ethics board, and testimony is taken, and it actually functions much like a regular court proceeding. And then there is a ruling by the ethics board. Okay, so I want everybody to understand the ethics boards are not doing their jobs, right? They're not like falling down on the job. They're not neglecting the unethical behavior here. Like somebody has to file a complaint, and it's got to be somebody with knowledge. It cannot be somebody of the general public. Okay, so this is something where we will have to wait. And I will remind you all, because many of us have developed amnesia about various things related to Trump. Okay. Pretty much every lawyer, I think in fact now it's actually every lawyer who was engaged in the fraudulent elector scheme related to January 6th has lost their license to practice. In some instances, it took like 2 years for that to take place. But those folks are not licensed to practice anymore. Rudy Giuliani is not licensed to practice, right? John Eastman has lost his bar license. So again, remember that this is a part of the legal process that can take some time. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. All right. We had a couple other questions today that I don't know, seemed a little bit forward looking for me. I had a debate about whether or not to actually respond to these today because and I have to kind of warn you all, because I think it's really important, again, to just reiterate here repeatedly that you've got to be really careful right now about where you're getting your information. Let me give you an example, okay? There are people on the Patreon feed. I'll shout out to my friends who are there because it was one of my longtime friends who asked this question today. No shade. But there are people on there who've been saying, what about Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution? Why am I seeing that pop up everywhere? Okay, folks, Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution is the impeachment clause. Okay. For some reason, someone out on social media has been claiming that the entire administration can be removed under Article 2, Section 4. Well, yes, there could be multiple impeachments of federal officials, the vice president, the president, federal judges, right? Anybody who's a cabinet appointee, they can all be impeached. But you all know by now what the impeachment clause does, right? You understand that it requires a proceeding to start in House Judiciary and then a vote in House Judiciary. And then it has to move to the floor of the House of Representatives and it has to be voted up by a simple majority. Then it has to move to the Senate where there's a trial. And without a 2/3 majority in that trial voting for removal, the person will not be removed. Okay. So this claim that is floating around on the internet that, Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution allows the entire administration to be wiped out is like pie in the sky bullshit. Okay. I'll just be honest about it. I don't know who's been throwing it out there. I don't know why it's taken such a foothold. It's the impeachment clause. Okay. So again, people need to be very mindful of where they're getting their information. Now, is it technically correct that people could be removed as a result of that? Yes. Is it at all politically likely? Is it a total waste of time to claim that the entire administration could be removed by impeachment? Also, yes. It's not going to happen. Okay. So the next set of topics, what I was getting to on this was this. Somebody said, what are we going to do about all these shenanigans at the polls? Okay. In 2026, meaning at the midterms. Okay. So I have to point something out here, and I'm laughing with you. I'm not laughing at you, okay? I have to point something out here, okay? There's an enormous amount of, I don't know, stochastic terrorism is probably the best way to frame it around the 2026 election right now. All sorts of people, also people on our side of the fence who are misreporting things, claiming, for instance, that the troops that are currently being trained for rollout in cities starting in January are being trained to interfere with the election. That's false. Okay, I just want to make this really clear. That's not what they're being trained for. Like, the actual reporting on this is that training is taking place so that they can roll into cities to disrupt protests. All right. Does that mean that there might not be some shenanigans at the polls? Yeah, maybe. Does it mean that they're not trying to get us all used to the idea of all of our cities being occupied by the National Guard? Of course they're trying to do that. They're trying to normalize all these things that we know are illegal, okay? But I also think that part of why they're doing this is to terrify people into not voting, all right? Because I'm going to say this again, this cannot be repeated too often. They do not have the manpower to carry out all of these things that they are signaling, right? They are having terrible problems recruiting people for ICE. And the National Guard that's been rolled out in DC is picking up garbage and doing lawn care, right? The morale among those people who've been taken away from their families, let alone over the holidays, to do what? To stand around DC picking up leaves? This is not a situation that actually is going to create the kind of chaos that they want us to believe is coming, okay? And I also have to remind you, because a lot of people don't know this, VoPro, or voter protection, is done in every county in this country, okay? There are friends of mine who are VoPro leads in places like St. Johns County, Florida, okay? That's like St. Augustine. And, they are charged with making sure that polling places are protected. People have literally been trained in what to do if somebody comes to a polling place with a gun. What to do if, people show up in camo, arguably under color of state law. What do you do? So the idea that they're going to roll into every one of the tens of thousands of polling places around America to interfere with the vote is extremely slim. I would say not possible. They don't have the manpower to do it. Okay. And they're also going to get resistance from the troops, just period, end of story. Okay. So again, I want people to keep in mind that some of the threats that are being made so that people self-police. Okay. When you hear things like this, if your reaction is oh my God, I'm really scared about what's going to happen when I go to vote, that's what they want. Okay. And it's time, because we're heading into 2026, to start thinking about how you are going to communicate to others about the fact that it is safe to go vote and they should go vote anyway. Because the only way, by the way, in my opinion, given where we are right now and what's happening in the polls and what we've seen in recent elections, that we're not going to take back the House is if this kind of voter intimidation works. Okay. The other thing that I'm going to remind people of, because somebody just said it in the comments, and this has been coming up all over the place also, is this issue with the Dominion voting systems. Okay. What people do not understand, and again, this is something where you really have to think about where you're getting your information. Okay. There are paper ballots. There are paper ballots in many instances where these Dominion voting machines are being used. Paper ballots are fed into them. Okay. Keep this in mind. Okay. There are protocols in every single jurisdiction in this country to validate the vote. All right. Recounts, paper records. Okay. The idea that somehow now that Dominion has been bought by a Republican operative, I agree, not ideal. Okay. But the idea that that somehow is going to throw the entire vote is pie in the sky nonsense. Again, this is a place where people actually need to get their information. How do people vote where you live? Let me tell you how it's done here, okay? Because I imagine it's quite similar, okay? You show up to your polling place, they print you out a ballot. You fill in those little black circles, right? You walk over to the separate voting machine, you scan your ballot, and your ballot is numbered based on who you are. And that paper ballot is maintained, and there are laws about how long they have to maintain those paper ballots in the event that there is a need for a recount, okay? Again, I have to remind people, not all the terrifying things that are being thrown around on social media. All these people are oh, they're going to fuck with the 2026 election. People have to remember something else about this. And I'm on a rant now. Sorry, you guys, but you got me started. Remember this, okay? the places where they are most likely to be able to suppress the vote are by laws passed in state legislatures, right? We're eliminating 13 voting sites in a predominantly Black county. That's happened in Georgia. Not the exact number, but they've done that, okay? Same thing in certain districts in Texas. We're going to shrink the number of voting locations down to 1 so that you have to literally stand in line for 12 hours if you want to vote. And we're going to do it in predominantly Democratic and Black and brown districts. Okay, that is a much more effective form of voter suppression. And this is one reason why I've been saying to all of you, like, you've got to find out what's happening in terms of voter protection laws in the state where you live. Okay, this is a place where your intervention can really actually make a difference. But these conspiracy theory ideas, right? That like they're going to roll the National Guard into every single polling place, or they're somehow going to steal the election by like rigging into every Dominion voting system, which they can't do, by the way. Like, again, this is one reason why all this stuff about Starlink drives me absolutely mad. That stuff about the 2024 election originated from a known crank. And there are people on our side of the fence who just ran with it, who still to this day are like, I believe Kamala won the election. Okay. Because by the way, that's much easier to confront than the fact that we are living in a white supremacist Christian nationalist country. Again, don't get me started. Okay. It's really important to confront reality. All right. Because if we know what reality is, we're able to actually combat these things on the ground. And that means doing things like showing up to advocate for voter protection when it comes to state laws. It means things like volunteering for voter protection work. It means things like being a precinct captain where you live so that you know how to protect your local precinct. And you're doing the work of ensuring the fact that votes are being effectively and carefully counted and that everyone who wants to vote is able to do so if they are registered to do so under local law. Okay, so again, this is a place where I just have to like ask everyone, and I'm not particularly calm because I get really agitated about this, but to please calm down. Like, understand that they're trying to intimidate people with this stuff. And unfortunately, the intimidation, the route of this disinformation is that someone, for clicks and likes, whether on the left or on the right, puts this shit into the social media ecosphere, and people up on our side of the fence pick it up like it's truth and spread it like manure, not to fertilize, but to kind of like make everybody think that the election stinks. And that in and of itself is voter suppression. You got me? Like, if you are part of the chain of disinformation saying that they're going to terrorize people in the streets in front of the polls, or that the Dominion voting systems are all compromised, you're telling people that their vote does not matter. You're telling people that if they try to show up, they might get shot. You are doing the work of the right wing for it if you are spreading that nonsense around on social media. Full stop. Full stop. Now, do we have a real problem with the National Guard being illegally rolled into certain places? Yes, absolutely we do. Do we have really serious concerns about voter suppression through the use of state and local laws? Absolutely. Okay, those are legitimate areas of concern, okay? But the courts are working on the issue of the National Guard rollouts, okay? And they don't have the manpower. And we have control over what happens in state and local governments. We have a role to play in how that all plays out, all right? So I don't really want anybody doing this thing of like, how are we going to deal with shenanigans at the polls? You know how we're going to deal with it? We're going to get people out to vote. We're going to advocate in state and local legislatures for the right kinds of laws to be passed, right? And we're going to let the good lawyers like Mark Elias, who has like 61 voter protection cases pending right now in federal court, do his job, right? It's like same with the ACLU, right? So again, like, don't let them terrify you into being a part of the problem. Okay? Like, get your information from reliable sources. Make sure that you have vetted who you're listening to. And if it sounds like something that is designed to scare you, you should second guess it, to be honest, especially when it comes to elections. All right. Somebody asked a question about what happens if we win during the midterm. So I've talked about this a little bit, and I just want to mention this, okay? The reason why it is so important that we take back the House, and they only have a very slim majority right now. By the way, Tennessee, I think it's the Tennessee 7th, you have to vote in favor of, I think it's Afton Bain. Am I remembering her name correctly? There's a special election coming up next week. You need to vote for her. That's going to give us another pickup in the House. All right. And Indivisible is directing people to phone bank for her and lots of other things. You can phone bank from her anywhere in the country. You should. All right. if we take back the House, then we have the option, not the option, then we have the reality that we will control the committee appointments, okay? And that means that we will also control the committees and what they can do, all right? Getting a Democratic majority, particularly a Democratic majority that has the will to fight, which is a really big question mark, right? Like, it's not Hakeem Jeffries, all right? But a Democratic majority that actually has the will to fight back means that, one, Trump's entire agenda will be stopped in its tracks, because if the House doesn't vote up any of his policy provisions, they will not become law. Okay, so that's really important. The second thing is that investigations can begin. You know, remember that whole thing about impeachment I was talking about earlier in the broadcast? We can impeach people by starting investigations in House Judiciary if there's the will to do it. We can have investigations from House Oversight about everything that ICE has done to terrorize communities and about, you know, like the people running it. The terrifying people at Customs and Border Patrol who rolled into Chicago and terrorized families and literally have not really been able to make any single indictment stick. We can have investigations about what Stephen Miller has been doing and about, like, you know, that horrible concentration camp in the Everglades and, you know, this attempt to deport like 30 million people. We can have investigations into all of that. And there is so much that can be done with control of the House, and that's leaving aside the Senate, right? Again, I'm going to tell you, I do not think it is likely that we will get a 2/3 majority in the Senate, because only a third of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years. They have 6-year terms. So there are some seats that are up for re-election that are hard R's, and it's going to be very difficult for those to get flipped. All right. It's not impossible in this environment. You know, I'm going to remind you all, like 81% of the country, Republican, Independent, Democrat, thinks Trump is hiding something in the Epstein files. 70% of the country opposes the idea of an invasion of Venezuela. More than 70% of the country is distressed and upset about Trump's economic policies. Not impossible, okay, but unlikely. And so the possibility that we will be able to, like, get Trump actually out of office, slim. Again, not impossible. But it's critically important that we take back the House, because that's a place where actual accountability can begin. And again, you want to talk about what Pam Bondi's been doing, weaponizing the DOJ? You want to talk about RFK Jr. claiming that vaccines cause autism and all the evisceration of the CDC? That's an investigation that can take place, right? You want to talk about Pete Hegseth, you know, saying he's going to do like a military inspection of Mark Kelly, or a uniform inspection of Mark Kelly. More on that in a minute. You want to talk about all this crazy shit about, like, women can't be warriors and, like, what he's done in terms of discrimination in the U.S. military? That's an investigation, right? That's just for starters. Linda McMahon in the DOE, you want to put her in front of a congressional committee and have her testify about why she thinks the Department of Education should be dismantled? That can happen. Okay. So again, like, much can happen like after the midterms, meaning like beginning like the first week in January of 2027, assuming that we win. All right. And it is really critical. I mean, this is again one reason why you've really got to mind your capacity for sharing horrible propaganda and doomsaying and like naysaying and all this. We're all fucked, you know, all those kind of references that people are, you know, want to post on social media, because you're depressing the vote. Right. And you can deal with reality of the fact that we're up against a fascist regime without depressing the vote through artificial means. All right. Okay. Last thought for today. You know, Pete Hegseth did threaten Mark Kelly yesterday with a court martial for simply being a part of a video that said troops should not follow illegal orders, which, by the way, is the law in this country. Okay. Like, just follow the law. That's literally all that video said. What they're talking about is pulling Mark Kelly, who is retired, back into active service so that he could be court-martialed and potentially imprisoned. And on top of that, Pete Hegseth, the guy has so many issues. Like, can I just say this? Like, I went and actually looked at some stuff about him because I blocked a lot of it out this morning. You know, they're disaffiliating with the Boy Scouts. I am no fan of the Boy Scouts. Let me just tell you, like, their whole record of child abuse and molestation is disgusting. But like, the military is unaffiliating with the Boy Scouts because they are now making room for trans boys in the Boy Scouts. Pete Hegseth has issues. Like, I know that's like the understatement of the year, but like, I went and read some of his like personal history again this morning. You know, 5 affairs in the first marriage, alcoholism on the set on Fox News, twice accused of rape. Right? That's leaving aside all this insane like warrior ethos stuff, all the neo-Nazi and white nationalist and Christian nationalist tattoos he has all over his body. The fact that he wasn't allowed to accompany Biden's inaugural because his own troops reported him as an internal security threat. Like, this is the man in charge of the DOD right now, claiming that Mark Kelly has besmirched the U.S. military. Like, it's appalling. It's just appalling. And Mark Kelly, of course, responded, gave great interviews yesterday on MSNBC. Again, I have to point out, it is not lost on any of us, I don't think, that they've put a target on the back of Mark Kelly, whose own wife was nearly executed because a politician put a literal target on her on social media. Again, the threat is real, right? And simultaneously, Mark Kelly is doing what literally I think every other Democrat should be doing to stand up for the 6 people in elected office who made this video. He is saying, like, he will not back down. All he was doing was telling the troops they have to follow the law, right? And if every Democrat got out there and said, we're behind Mark Kelly and Abigail Spanberger and everybody else who is like out there saying all of this, Trump would back down. Like, we've seen this over and over again. This is, again, a bully's methodology. And if everybody stands up and says, like, it will end, all right? The problem is that, like, we're lost in the weeds now. Like, is it legal or is it not legal? Or what are troops allowed to do? Or blah, blah, blah. Like, they're supposed to defy legal orders under the law. Their oath is to the Constitution and the laws of the United States, not to Donald Trump, not to Pete Hegseth, who is like, who he is. Again, like, not somebody whose hands are clean, right? Their oath of office is to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the United States. And that means that if they get an illegal order, they're not supposed to follow it. To the point, again, that the U.S. military has a hotline for soldiers, enlisted people, officers to actually call in this event. All right. So I just have to point out to everybody that, like, this Mark Kelly thing is also like a bit of a kerfuffle that is designed to make people outraged. I don't know how far they're going to get on this. I think, trying to recall Mark Kelly to prosecute him is a stretch. But I also just have to point out one other thing in relation to this. All right. Between Mark Kelly and this video, right? In the last 24 hours, very few people are talking about the Epstein files. And I'm not, you know me, I don't ever say anything as a distraction, because threatening to prosecute a senator for telling troops to follow the law is not a distraction. Like, it's another level of fascism, to be honest. But at the same time, we're now like a scant 25 days from the date that the Epstein files are supposed to be released. And it's really important that we keep them, like, in our discussions, publicly, politically, and otherwise. All right, that's it for today, everybody. There will be a broadcast tomorrow, but no broadcast on Thursday and Friday because of the holiday. I do want to encourage everyone to consider what you're going to do right now. This is a really good moment to start doing this come January 1st. What's your commitment going to be for 2026 when it comes to the midterms? How are you going to get involved? Where are you going to engage? What work are you going to do, and on behalf of what campaign or what issue? All right. It's a good moment to start thinking about these things, because 2026 is going to be here before we know it. And we're going to have an enormous amount of work to do next year to mobilize people and get people to the polls, on top of, like, keeping people, like, alive and fed and housed. All right. That's it, everybody. I will talk to all of you tomorrow. Please subscribe here, like this broadcast. And please don't forget that we depend on your subscriptions over at patreon.com/resistancelive to keep this show going. We are still running a 20% off annual subscriptions between now and the end of the year using the code FALL2025. Your subscriptions allow me to pay my staff. They allow me to be here away from my regular job, which is like running a political and leadership consulting company. And also to make sure that, like, I can do all the work that needs to be done to make sure I'm giving you guys accurate information. All right. And you help to feed my kids, which is nice. That's a good thing to do. All right. Thanks so much for all of your support, and I'll see you all back here tomorrow. Bye. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.